Welcome to the 43rd in a series of shows focused on Brookline as an age-friendly community. In 2012, Brookline was the first community in New England to be designated an age-friendly city by the World Health Organization of the United Nations. Since then, it's also been named an age-friendly city by the AARP. This was the result of work done by the community residents, by the select board, by town departments, and leadership provided by Brookline Can, an all-volunteer organization that works on issues for Brookline residents of all ages. Today, our guest is Michael Sandman, one of the 5 members of the select board. Mike grew up in Worcester, but spent a good part of his time with his family, his grandfather in Brookline. And as he said it, he learned more about the Brookline Green Line than he did the Worcester bus system. In 1974, Mike moved to Brookline. And for the last 30 years, he's been heavily involved in Brookline. He was the chair of the Brookline Community Foundation. He was involved on various committees. And I've seen him around town a lot and introduced to him first by one of our founding members, Frank Caro. Today, Mike, well, welcome, Mike.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
So today, I'd really like to get into the select board a little bit. Can you tell us a bit of the relationship between the select board? If you want to do one at a time, or I want to know about the town administrator, first of all. Who is the town administrator versus the select board?
Sure. Okay, so the town administrator is basically the person who handles the day-to-day running of the town. The department heads report to the town administrator, and there's a significant difference between the role of a town administrator and the role of a town manager, which some towns have. The town administrator, excuse me, comes to the select board for hiring and changing personnel, for adding positions and so forth, whereas a town manager has authority to do that on their own. The town administrator now is Charles Carey, Chaz. He was hired just about a year ago, a little bit more than a year ago, and has done, I think, a superb job in learning about Brookline, coming to grips with the various issues here. He comes across every time we have a discussion as being incredibly well informed and on top of things. And so as far as we're concerned, that's been working very, very well, I think.
Yeah, the town administrator was on the show. That's interesting because of the differences, and maybe we'll get into this a little later, the differences between a town like Brookline and some places that have a town manager and have other things. So it's the town meeting?
And town meeting is so the select board is the executive of the town, and the town meeting is the legislature of the town. And that sounds very cumbersome for a town to have an executive separate from the legislature. We're not a state or, the national government, but that is in fact the way the system is set up. So town meeting's primary responsibility is to pass the budget. The budget originates with the select board and the town administrator who put it all together, but then it goes through the town finance committee, which is called the advisory committee, and goes to town meeting for final approval. And we have 255 town meeting members. There are 15 from each of our 17 precincts. And I would guess that maybe 20% really read that budget. So sometimes town meeting doesn't pay as much attention to the budget as they do to other issues that come before the town. Things like zoning, for example, which is a very important topic in town meeting this year. And zoning, for example, can only be changed by a vote of town meeting, either a majority vote for certain kinds of changes or a 2/3 vote if we're changing the structure of zoning in a significant way.
It's interesting. Transportation board somewhat confuses me, but I think if you have something to add to that, I think we might go with a whole show on that. But
Sure. Well, indeed, you could. So the Transportation Board is one of many boards that is appointed by the Select Board. I think we must have something on the order of 40 active boards, commissions, committees, and so forth. Transportation Board is one of those. It has responsibility given to it by the state legislature, I think back in 1950s, to handle things like traffic controls, signs, that sort of thing, parking, fees, taxis, that whole group of topics that's really very important in Brookline. In fact, I think parking is probably the number 2 or 3 issue in traffic generally, number 2 or 3 issue, and certainly to seniors, it's a very important issue. Transportation Board is a little different than some of the other committees and commissions in that the state law that created it gives it some independence. And the only way to appeal a Transportation Board decision is to come to the Select Board and ask the Select Board to overrule it. And that happens very, very rarely. So the Transportation Board is sort of almost, as a practical matter, almost the final word on traffic and parking matters.
oh, great, thank you. That really is clear. Thank you. The current, you mentioned current issues that you might want to point out that are before you that relate to older adults.
Sure. So one thing that's very much on the minds of older adults and not so old adults as well are real estate taxes. In the last decade and a half, we've had an override every 3 to 4 years where we've gone to the voters and said we need to have more money than the state allows us to put into the real estate tax bill. The state limits us to 2.5% a year unless a majority of the voters give us permission to go higher than that. And we've had an override every 3 or 4 years because expenses have increased faster than that 2.5% would allow. Typically, the driving factor is labor. Something on the order of 80% of our total expenses are labor expenses, and in the school system, it's closer to 90%. And one of the things that would help enormously is if we had a bigger commercial tax base, because 90%, or I think 92% of our total revenue comes from residences. And if we can add commercial development, that commercial development pays at a higher tax rate than residences. It doesn't cost very much to service most commercial development. And if we can increase commercial development, it will, at the very least, slow down that rate of increase in real estate taxes and allow us to perhaps stretch out those overrides, or maybe even at some point, if we get enough commercial development, avoid them altogether.
Okay. And of course, related to taxes, et cetera, we have brought on various people for various specific things that were occurring, like war tax, work off, et cetera, a whole bunch of things that relate to that. But that's a key, absolutely a key item to all residents, but certainly to older adults who have been perhaps living in a place that their whole lives and paying real estate taxes. And that's a big expense item for them at this point. Right. So, but that's, you know.
I should also note that there are some specific tax relief measures for older adults. And they're income qualified. That is, you have to have certain asset and income limits in order to take advantage of those. But I think it's important for anybody who really feels constrained by their current real estate taxes to take a look at what the limits are and see whether they qualify, because they're there for people to use, and we're actually not seeing an enormous amount of uptake by seniors for these relief measures.
Yeah, and I would just to make one point there, I would ask you, and you have been, by the way, and so is the board, but to be aware of that issues affect older adults sometimes differently than others. So I brought up transportation. I don't want to get into micromobility now, but that's because that's in the future. We'll have you back for that. But there's a lot of different issues. And I guess I ask everybody on the select board to be really aware of the views of older adults as well as everybody else, because I think it applies to everybody in most cases. Most issues that older adults have in some way or another apply to the rest of the town.
Sure,
So,
sure. And I think I do want to talk about micro mobility in this session if we have an opportunity.
okay. Okay, let's get to that in a little bit.
Sure.
First, can we hit the charter reform so people are aware of what that is?
Sure. So I mentioned that the executive is the select board and the day-to-day administration, of course, the town administrator, and the legislative side of the town is town meeting. In cities, the difference is that there is a single person who's responsible for the executive side. It's either a town manager or a mayor. There are certainly communities that have a mayor, but it's a so-called weak mayor system where the city manager is vested with most of the authority. And the legislature is typically a city council or a town council of anywhere from 7 to 15 members. There's a discussion in Brookline about considering a change that would move us in that direction to having a single person responsible as opposed to a select board, or reducing the size of town meeting in some substantial way, or perhaps the most modest change would be to make the town administrator into a town manager and give that person more authority. So signatures are being gathered right now to put a question on the ballot that would elect a commission, a 9-person commission, to go ahead and redraft the way the town is structured, so-called do a charter, and it will take some time to gather all of those signatures and then have the election. And if a commission is created, they have 18 months to come back to the town, and the voters have a chance to decide whether or not to go ahead and adopt the charter that comes out of the commission.
Okay. Is there anything on the warrant article or something that's on the?
Yeah, there's a warrant article coming up in town meeting in November that will appoint a committee to look at this same thing. It would be appointed by the town meeting moderator. The moderator is the person who's elected to run town meeting.
Oh, okay.
And there are those of us who think that would be honest, and I'm one of them who thinks that, okay, but it's just a committee to have a conversation. A charter commission can actually do something. And as a practical matter, the thought that town meeting would vote itself out of existence as a result of a warrant article asking the legislature to change the way it was structured is pretty slim.
Yeah, okay, we'll go to the electorate, I think. You're right.
Right.
Okay, let's start with the other thing you mentioned, which is the MBTA Communities Act. Where does that stand at this point?
Sure. So the state legislature is very conscious of previous administration, Baker administration and the Healy administration, very, very conscious of the shortage of housing and the impact that has on housing prices and particularly on rent, which is perhaps the more significant thing for a lot of seniors. And as a result, they passed a requirement that a certain portion of the town be set aside for development of multifamily housing by right, and by right, which means that you don't have to get a special permit as long as the housing fits within some dimensional requirements. And there's a warrant article coming up in November that's been very heavily debated, and I think we're at a point where we have a very good consensus that I hope will be adopted by town meeting.
Yeah, I'm really impressed by that, by the way.
Yeah.
The way that process.
Been a huge amount of work, and my colleague Paul Warren deserves a lot of credit for really getting into the details and pulling together the two sides of this. There's one group of people who are very concerned that we would, if we go to make changes, and the changes that are proposed are along Harvard Street, that we would change the character of the town in a way that isn't beneficial.
Right.
And so a great deal of work has been done to make sure that the Harvard Street proposal won't do that, and at the same time provide compliance with the state law, which we have to comply with by the end of the year. If we don't comply with it, there's a risk that the state attorney general will sue us and win, and a judge will appoint a master to make the changes that we really ought to be making ourselves.
Right.
So that's the hammer.
Okay.
The carrot is a relatively small amount of money that comes from the state that would be at risk if we don't comply. But the hammer is what we're really concerned about.
Yeah. I'm
So
I'm looking forward to that. I've been watching the recent result, process, and Paul Warren's work, and I'm really impressed, and I'm hoping town meeting will move forward with that also, because
good.
I don't often give my own opinion, but I will give that.
Well, I'm very glad to hear that particular opinion. That's great, because that's exactly the way I'm hoping things will go. And I will suggest that I believe this show is going to air before we actually have town meeting. And I would encourage anybody who watches to call their town meeting members and ask them to vote for this, because it will help to promote that commercial development that I was talking about. And that ultimately, it'll take a long time, but ultimately that will provide us with an alternative to just to getting 92% of our revenue from residences.
Yep. I agree. Thank you. I'm going to get you into micromobility if you're ready.
Yes, sure.
And I will say that they talk about its effect on various vulnerable groups. And I will say that our audience is one of the vulnerable groups, especially in sidewalks. And but we're conscious of all. We have bicycle riders. Right. You have people doing everything. We have people with scooters that are, wheelchair scooters, etc. That move pretty fast, actually. But where are we on that? What do you have to say about it?
Sure. So let's just step back and talk about what the overall view is. If you look back probably 30 years or so, the general view was that streets are for vehicles, and people and bicyclists and so forth, just stay out of the way, please. And this is for us. And the idea was that any kind of work on the streets should be designed to make traffic flow faster. And that changed. It changed in Brookline sometime around the mid-1990s when Beacon Street was redesigned. And some new concepts were brought to Brookline, and you could see the results if people remember what Beacon Street was like compared to now. Crosswalks have been narrowed by having some curb bump outs. There are more traffic lights with pedestrian phases to them and so forth. So quite a bit was done in order to make that street safer, recognizing that it wouldn't speed traffic up. In fact, it would probably slow things down. And slowing things down is, while some drivers may gnash their teeth, is safer for just about everybody else who uses the streets. Because the speed, if someone on foot is actually hit by a vehicle, the speed that vehicle is going is a very significant determinant of whether they'll be injured severely or killed. So we want to slow traffic down wherever there's a risk that they'll to pedestrians. So out of that evolved the concept of complete streets, which basically says the streets aren't just for vehicles, they're for everybody. They're for cyclists, they're for pedestrians. I'm not so sure about the roller skaters and skateboarders, but we have to keep them safe too. And of course, we had an experiment here with scooters, which I think a lot of seniors were not very happy with because of the behavior of the people who use the scooters.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So, yeah, right, indeed. So,
it was a matter of them being left in the middle of the sidewalk.
Yeah, left around and
dropped,
used on the sidewalks, and some very inappropriate things were done with them, which is unfortunate because they're a great tool for mobility. And the upshot of this has been to look at all of the street redesigns that are being done. Washington Street is in the process of going through a redesign, for example, from one end to the other, pretty much. Excuse me, and pay attention to what's being done to protect pedestrians, to make it safer for cyclists. I happen to be a bicyclist, a cyclist regularly. As I've gotten older, the hills around here somehow got steeper, and so I got an electric assisted bike, but it still turn the pedals in order to make it work. And by the way, I would encourage your reviewers, if they are comfortable using a bicycle at all, but a little bit doubtful about their ability to do it comfortably, to take a look at an electric assisted bike. But all of those constituencies need to be wrapped together in what we're trying to do. A corollary to that is sidewalks. And there are two elements to that. One is we need to be fixing sidewalks. There was a period of time when we just didn't spend the money to do that, and we're beginning to catch up now in the town budget. And the other is lighting. And there are some pretty good examples around town of lighting that is intended to light the sidewalk, not just the road, street lighting. And we need to be moving more towards that. That's an expensive process. It costs about $60,000 per 100 feet. So for a tenth of a mile, it's $300,000 worth of lighting needs to go in to change over to more pedestrian friendly lighting. And that's a big chunk. We have something on there of 100 miles worth of streets here. So, and certainly not all of it needs to have new pedestrian lighting, but to do a thorough job is going to take some time because it takes some money.
Yeah, that's something that Frank Carroll worked on a lot. And that's something that we're very conscious of, because the senior center is located on Winchester Street. And Winchester Street is one of those areas where lighting is really not there. So it may be 100, feet, but how about the 100 feet on Winchester Street?
Right. So that's a very.
Of course, I'm sure somebody has another street. So.
Well, yeah, there are some others, but that's a very clear situation where people, they walk to the senior center, they park their cars nearby or whatever, and they walk. That's a very strong case. Unfortunately, when the senior center went in, the street was redesigned to have some speed bumps to slow traffic down, but there wasn't much thought to lighting, and it's a street with a lot of trees, and the lighting has to be set low enough so that the trees don't get in the way. So there's a case for doing that, and the only way to do it is to put a regular item into the capital improvement plan for street lighting in the same way that we now have, in fact, for bicycling improvements.
Yep. Yeah, I think you're right. I'd like to get just for everybody's sake, how do we best communicate with you, with the select board, but you especially, because you're here?
Sure. Okay.
So what's your choice? What's your
any way you choose, really, that you're most comfortable with. Email is fine. It's msandman@brooklinema.gov. That's my town email address. People are welcome to send me a text message, 617-513-8908, or call me, either way. Just had somebody call yesterday evening, very concerned that a street that they thought was going to be closed for Halloween, the DPW hadn't shown up yet with the sawhorses that barricade the street. And in the course of the conversation, the barricade showed up, so that was solved. But just the same, I had a conversation with.
You take credit?
No, I had nothing to do with it. All I could say was it's good timing. But I did have a conversation this morning with Aaron Shute, the Commissioner of Public Works, to make sure that their street is on the list for next year, so that it happens a little bit more automatically than it did this year, and a little bit earlier. So and that was a call out of the blue. And so please feel very free to do that.
Yeah, and speaking of that, with the town meeting coming, what's the role of the select board related to the town meeting? Do you do anything?
So the select board sits at the very front of town meeting and hopes for the best. So there are 20 or so warrant articles that are going to be acted on. The select board gives a report on each one. Usually it's a pretty brief report, making a recommendation as to how people should vote. On the MBTA Communities Act, where we'll be speaking at some length, trying to make sure that everybody is comfortable with what we're suggesting. Our role is, well, we vote. First of all, we have 5 votes in addition to the 255 elected town meeting members. We will typically stand up and give our opinions on significant issues so that people understand where we're coming from. The town meeting, the process of town meeting is really managed by the town moderator, Kate Parverman, who will be up at the front with a gavel and make sure that all the people, that everyone follows the rules and the rules of debate. And I'm sure she'll do a fine job at that, and we'll do our best to get our point of view across.
And will that be in person or remote?
It's going to be in person, except for people who want to be remote. And if there's a procedure, they need to let the town clerk know that they want to be remote, so that we can get the system set up so that they can come in by Zoom. They'll be able to speak if they want to. Their video will show in the auditorium. There's going to be a dress rehearsal in a couple of nights to make sure that all the technology works. We went down to the town of Plymouth, which had a so-called hybrid meeting just like this in March, and saw what they did and took away some ideas and learned some things that we shouldn't do. If someone would like to come to town meeting, if a town meeting member would like to come to town meeting, they can join it by Zoom or come in person. For people who aren't town meeting members, it will be on the Brookline Interactive Group channel, of course.
Excellent. I think I've pestered you enough for for one show, but you're definitely welcome to come back another time, anytime you'd like, if there's some subjects or things you want to discuss or bring up. So I want to thank you, Mike, for a very informative show and very pleasant. I want to tell everybody else that the program will be rebroadcast several times. Usually, it depends, in the next few weeks. And it's also, of course, available on the Brookline CAN website and in the Brookline CAN Facebook and Twitter accounts. So, and of course, we're on the air right now, but you'll see us again. Thank you. Thanks, Mike.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.